Now 6:04 p.m. and I will call this online public meeting to order. It is March 1st, 2023. My name is Andy Gregg and I'm the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Due to COVID-19, regular meetings and public hearings of the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission will be held in hybrid format with both in-person and virtual participation options for commissioners, staff, and the public. This will allow for safe participation by commission members, staff, and any citizen interested in attending. For those of you joining remotely via computer, you should be able to see tonight's meeting agenda on your screen. If you can't see the screen and have joined by phone only, I will be announcing the agenda items as we move through the meeting topics. Members of the public and applicants that have joined remotely are attendees, which means you can see and hear the event if you join by computer or mobile device, or you can just hear the event if you join by phone. Other event participants cannot hear your audio unless you are acknowledged by the commission chair or staff and are unmuted. This evening's agenda is planned as follows. Roll call and introductions, prior meeting minutes approval, public comments for subjects other than the public hearings on tonight's agenda, as there will be specific public comment periods as part of the hearings. Advisory review within the Vancouver Heritage Overlay for the Providence Academy site. New business includes a discussion of the Revitalize Washington Call for Session proposals, a report on the USACE Portland District Navigation presentation. In old business, there will be updates and announcements, including conversations on subcommittee planning, Regional History Day, CAMP training, update on the virtual meeting format, good of the order, and adjournment. We'll now have a roll call of HPC members who are attending tonight's meeting. Commission members, please say, "I'm here," after I call your name. Jan Bader.
Here.
Vaughn.
I'm here.
Morgan Fraser.
Here.
Heidi Mandler Huff is formally excused. Let the minutes reflect that she is asked to be absent, as is absent Elaine Thatcher. And Andy Gregg, I'm here. Meeting notes approval. Does anyone have any comments on the February 1 meeting notes?
Approve.
It's been moved to approve the February meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
It's been seconded. Now that it's been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved for the February meeting, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Let the record show that the approval of the minutes passed unanimously. Now on to public comment. We will now take public comment on any items besides today's meeting items. We'll begin with attendees in the room. Please have a seat at the microphone if you would like to make a comment. Greetings, Holly Chamberlain.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Holly Chamberlain, Director of Historic Preservation for the Historic Trust, and have some updates tonight for commissioners, staff, and guests. At Providence Academy, we've received the archaeological permit necessary for the testing and monitoring associated with the parking and landscape renovation. The Trust has submitted a grant application to the National Trust's Johanna Favreau Fund for Preservation for additional archaeological work needed to learn more about the significant Sacred Heart Garden. The Trust is preparing its response to the draft area of potential effect distributed by the Interstate Bridge Replacement staff. The organization is very concerned that Providence Academy is not included in the area and will be encouraging that it will be included along with the entire reserve. At Officers Row in the West Barracks, the project to provide power and water to the Howard House parking lot in support of food trucks is complete, and the archaeological testing report sent to DAP. If you know of food truck owners interested in serving on the row, please have them contact the Trust. The Section 106 review in process for the Trust to install 2 electrical vehicle charging stations on East Officers Row is in process. We want to supply tenants with an on-site charging option. An existing power pole will be used as the power source, and 2 adjacent angled parking spots will be designated for EV charging use. This project has received approval by Clark Public Utilities and will use existing electrical service. A study is planned to determine other locations for charging stations at the Historic Reserve. Installation of air conditioning units is underway for the NCO duplexes in the West Barracks. 3 have now been completed, and others will be done subsequently in accordance with tenant turnovers or extended tenant vacations. The Trust is gearing up for Summerfest 2023 Community Celebration and is grateful to be a recipient on behalf of the City of Vancouver of a lodging tax grant of $10,000. Put Summer Solstice Mindful Movement at the Howard House on your calendars for the first event. Bids are in for the Grant House roof replacement project, but one bidder has challenged another. Hopefully, that can be resolved soon and construction can start in the spring. The Trust has written an article about Grant House history and preservation for the Senior Messenger. The Trust thanks City of Vancouver staff for making progress on replacing burned-out streetlights along the row. This makes a big difference for the safety of office and residential tenants and the general public who comes to enjoy the spaces.
Holly?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the people online can't hear you. Could you move your microphone closer to your...
Certainly.
Thank
Is
you.
that better? The Trust has completed its advocacy communications with local legislators regarding support for the Heritage Capital Projects program. Overall legislator response throughout the state has been positive, but many note that it is a difficult budget year. The Howard House is number 3 on the list of applicants, so we hope to continue talking about roof replacements into the coming year. And I've brought with me tonight some of the advocacy postcards that have been prepared by the Washington Trust, and I'll leave them here for people to pick up if you would like to take some for personal advocacy or to give to other people who might be interested. The Washington Trust for Historic Preservation is accepting applications from high school students to attend the 2023 Youth Heritage Project. This summer's program will be centered in Richland and explore the legacy of the Manhattan Project and the concept of co-stewardship at the former Hanford Nuclear Reservation. This week-long program is free for students to attend and is a wonderful opportunity to learn about state history and work with others to preserve it. You can learn more at preservewa.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Holly. Is there additional public comment?
Chair,
Welcome.
Chair Greg,
Yes.
we had one more public comment from the Parks Department of Ridgefield, and she wasn't sure if she was going to be able to get online. Her name is Galena Burley, and I will bring up her email that she wanted us to make sure that the members were aware of. I'll just read it because it's short. The City of Ridgefield's Parks Board wishes to learn more about the great work of the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission. The board wants to raise awareness about the historic and cultural resources in our community and partner with the commission on future projects. The board invites you and/or commission staff, so this was written to us as staff, to make a short presentation about this work and partnership opportunities at any board meeting this year. Meetings are every second Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. at Ridgefield Administrative and Civic Center, and it gives the address. In-person presentations are preferred, but arrangements can be made for virtual too. Please reach out to the city's parks manager, Galena Burley, for more information, and we have her contact email on the web page. So she has enthusiastically reached out to us, and we just wanted to make sure that you all were aware of that. And we would be happy to facilitate a presentation at one of their meetings since it doesn't conflict with ours directly. That's all.
Great.
We also have one person online.
Okay.
Mark Thompson, are you interested in making public comment?
No, I have no comment.
Great, thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to advisory review Vancouver Heritage Overlay. Welcome.
Good evening, members of the Commission. I'm Keith Jones. I'm a senior planner with the City of Vancouver. To my left is Charles Ray, who's the City Urban Forester. And tonight's item is really what I would say the final piece of the redevelopment of the Academy, Providence Academy and Aegis redevelopment. So the Historic Trust, as everyone knows, has put a substantial investment in rehabbing the structure, including the roof, a number of restorations around the porch areas and other areas of the building that needed restoration. And to fund the restoration of the building, the Trust has entered into an agreement with Marathon Development for redevelopment as the Aegis development, and that came through as phase 1. I believe that was back in 2018, and that was shown as building A and B, which are being constructed now. And then phase 2 of the project came, I believe, before the Commission for advisory review, and that was, I believe, a couple of years ago for a parking structure and some additional multifamily. And then just last year in the southwest corner of the campus, the parking area, and then the rehab of the former gym or preschool building. And then there's a substantial public area in the center of the redevelopment that will have a public easement and will be available to the public. So what we're here tonight is the final piece. It's the landscaping area along Evergreen in the front where the Hart turnaround area is, as well as, fortunately, you'll see from the applicant the hardscape and landscape proposed in this area, but that'll replace what was the El Presidente Mexican restaurant. So that's definitely a positive change to see. That's really the overview of the full build out of the concept or of the redevelopment plan. So if I could go to the next slide, and I apologize, it looks like our slides are at different page sizes. I'm going to let the applicant get a little more into their program and proposal for this space, but it does preserve the Sacred Heart area and adds some hardscape and landscaping features to beautify that part of the Academy, and the goal is to preserve views to the Academy. So this is an advisory review, so it's an administrative staff decision, and the Heritage Overlay requires that staff come to the Historic Preservation Commission to, is that better? I'm sorry. Get advice from the Commission in regards to the proposal. The code requires that the main portions of the Heritage Overlay require that the applicant retain mature trees that are 30 feet in height or greater. And so they have inventoried the trees that exist within the project area. If I could get the next slide. And those are shown in this map as the existing conditions. There are street trees that are located along Evergreen. There are some holly trees that are considered invasive, as well as some oak trees. And in working with the urban forester, Charles Ray, to my left, and looking at those trees, we've determined that the cedar trees, and I think the next slide may help visualize that a little better. Go to the next slide. So this is looking at this perspective. There's the two cedar trees that are circled there, as well as all of the street trees. We've determined that should be retained because the space is available for those trees to remain and to grow. So I've just highlighted the specifics of the code. So new construction shall minimize the removal of existing mature trees exceeding 30 feet in height. And just to stress too, there is some somewhat of a conflict, and that often happens when we're talking about trees, of course, that grow in a certain location. The other goal of the heritage overlay is to also preserve views to the academy. So we've, from a staff perspective and looking at the trees that are existing, we've determined that those two cedars, based on our determination, should be preserved, but we're also here tonight to get input from the commission on what their viewpoints are. So that's really the basics of our recommendation from a staff level. I'd like to see the applicant come up and get into more of the detail. They have several slides they'd like to show the commission and go through. So with that, if there are any questions for either me or Charles, of course, we're here after the applicant's presentation as well.
The tree to the right-hand corner of the slide on the corner of the building, that's going to stay? Yes?
Yes, that's a street tree. Charles Ray, urban forester with City of Vancouver.
I'm sorry, it's on the,
It's hard because we don't have a printout of the tree plan.
it's,
I mean, it's online.
I believe the
This
tree
tree.
on the eastern section is identified as protected on their plans.
okay.
Before we continue, I'd like to ask the question, do any commissioner members have ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest for this case? Okay, I thought not. Thank you.
Which tree were you talking about?
It's not even shown on that diagram.
Oh, so it's not in the project area.
I think if you scroll down to a couple more slides, it'll show that existing tree that's off
Go to
to
the
the
next
east.
slide, Bart. Yeah, it's the light green one that's in the corner of the building.
I think we talked about that when they were doing the parking.
Okay.
Didn't we talk about that during the parking and trying to preserve that tree? Yeah, we did.
I mean, I know we talked about trees, I just don't know if that's.
Well, yeah, I'm like,
I know-
looking at the applicant because I know they know. I'm like,
I
we
know
don't
we talked
know.
about trees, I just don't remember that specific one. Okay, that answered the question. It's,
Yeah, I do remember there was a big tree in the parking lot. We talked about preserving it. It's hard when they get split up into so many different sections to follow along.
Because it does look like there's a tree on this rendering, right here. And, sorry, it does look like on the planting plan with the character, there is a tree that's pretty large, just off of the pathway. I'm guessing that's it? You know, person who, I mean, applicant? Anybody? This, so, the tree that she's talking about, that beautiful big green tree that's fairly close to the building, looks like it's that. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, the one that's, the cursor is on it right now, that's the tree, and that's actually, because of the way the project is phased, that is part of the landscape for the parking renovation, so.
I thought,
she has a better memory than us.
That's okay, just clarifying, thanks.
thank you.
I do have questions for staff, but I'm not sure if we're there yet. Are we?
Yes, we're there.
Okay. I wasn't sure if we're finished. Okay, so you mentioned the street trees and that they'll be kept. But I was just wanted to clarify that there's, okay, so there's I think it's 6 trees, but there's 2 different numbers on the staff memo where it says that there are 6 trees, and then it says there are 7 trees. So I just want to make sure everything that I've seen has 6 trees indicated, but.
Mind is showing.
Yes. Yeah. I wrote it down. Okay, so.
Move it
Down, or one more slide again.
Well, it says there are 7.
Thank you.
Okay,
The one that didn't get printed.
sorry. Trying to find. I'm not sure if it's this report.
So for all of the commission members, you should be able to see this plan on your iPads as well. Okay.
Oh, on it, also like as a file.
Yeah, if you push the button on the side, I brought up the webpage for all of you.
I even put it on. Well, this says
It worked last time.
Oh, here.
Well, I'm looking at, Bart's screen there.
Oh, I think it might have been a typo.
So is it supposed to be 7 or?
Looks like, looks like there's 7,
Okay.
but 6 on this
Looked at all
project.
when
Okay, and that's helpful, because that was my second question, which is, in reality, there's like 8 trees between the 2 parking lot structures. And so I assumed that that one closest to
always
the
when I go for
parking lot structure just is part of the plan because it's not part of the renovation or the changes. Is that right?
Thanks.
It's not on
Why
here.
don't you just stay up here?
So the legend is covering where it would be, and it's just right before that parking structure. So I'm just assuming it's not on here because no plans are to remove it?
The tree that we were already talking about?
No, it's not on this rendering, it's not on any of the renderings, but in real life, if you were to go down there, you would see an 8th tree. And so I just didn't know if that was because it's not part of the plan, it's not part of the, it's not gonna be interfered with.
So that would be over by the parking lot?
Yeah, on the east side.
Okay, yeah, I think we,
Yeah.
that was part of that
That
scope.
previous discussion,
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
thank you, I just wanted to make sure, okay, thank you, that helps.
Sure.
All right, then,
And the map does show 7 trees on the
but
street.
there's an 8th.
And there's an 8.
The one at the far left would actually not be on Historic Trust property,
It's on the far right, because that's east.
Under the legend.
but in terms of counting the street, I thought we were still on street trees. Okay, so the street tree on the far left is not on Historic Trust property.
Okay,
Oh, tree number 9.
but it's,
I'm sorry, yeah,
It's on the.
but I'm not talking
GS
about that.
property.
Okay.
that's correct.
So you answered my question, so it's great, okay.
Mm.
And my other question was, okay, so to clarify, it's 7 trees, not 6, right? I just want to make sure, because there's 2 things in here, 6 and 7, and then there's, there's the difference in,
So this, Charles Ray, urban forester with the city of Vancouver, for the people, of who are virtually. So there's 7 street trees identified on this plan that's being shown, but only 6 on this site, on this, project. Only 6 street trees as part of this project.
so what she was just saying, I think maybe is the far left one is not part of this proposal, right?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, so with that in mind, number 2, the tree number 2, which isn't part of this list that's on the staff response, but it is part of the renderings from the applicant. It says, mentions it in the notes, which says that number 2 is an English oak, and that it can be removed. And another place it said it was an English holly, but it is actually an English oak. So the note said, English holly number 2 should be removed, but it's actually not an English holly, it's an English oak tree. So it's a very different tree, and just wanted to make sure that was what you meant to say.
It's the blue one in the bottom.
Yeah,
Right.
green one right in the middle, yeah, exactly, right there.
So that is, an oak. And there's
It's being proposed to be left or removed.
being proposed to be removed.
I think that is the tree that's being proposed to be removed to enhance the view shed. From what I read. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, it's just, again, the thing says English holly in one place and English oak in another place, and it's an English oak. So I just want to be clear about that, because they have different kind of values, I think, as aesthetic trees. So just want to make that note. And then,
Commissioner Bond, can I interrupt you? Got a request from someone online that it's very confusing who's speaking.
okay,
So if everyone can identify themselves when they're speaking, it would be helpful.
okay.
And I wanted to make sure, it sounded like you verbalized the question that you talked to staff about, but for everyone online, could you make sure that, is that something that you did get on the record? Because you conferred between the 2 of you, and I wasn't sure if that got on the record or not, so
Okay.
I
So
think
what-
you did.
So between staff and I, we were discussing a tree that's on the far east side for the east parking lot, and And they did confirm that's not part of his plans. It was actually part of a previous discussion. And this is Commissioner Bond. My last question, which may actually be better for the applicant, but I wasn't sure if you might know, there's a part, again, it's not part of your memo, so you may not be the person to ask, but there's a portion that says A, B, C, and D are not applicable, but I don't know what A, B, C, and D are. They didn't reference anything. And I, having knowing that you reviewed their application, I just was wondering if you might have insight into what that means. And that is on their, I'll show you. Here. It's on page 4 of their, part of their application. And I just wasn't sure when it's talking about, I'm guessing it's maybe referring to the Heritage Overlay section, A, B, C, D?
That's correct.
Okay.
This is Holly Chamberlain from the Historic Trust, and those were sections that were not relevant to this project in any way.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
That's all the questions I have for staff.
Thank you. Any further questions on the part of the commission for staff? Would the applicant like to provide additional testimony?
We have some tag teaming that we're going to do. I'm Temple Lentz, the president and CEO of the Historic Trust. And I'd like to give some high notes. I know that you all received your packets and read them, so we're not going to belabor it and go through, but just kind of hit some of the high notes. And then we have Stephen Elbeck here from Sarah Architects, who can go through some of the slides and explain more of the design. But first, just thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. We're looking forward to input from staff and from all of you to help make this proposal even stronger. The Academy's southern frontage has had many different uses over time, including formal and productive gardens, a tennis court, a restaurant, spaces for play, exercise, parking, sports, spiritual ceremonies, and patriotic observances. The Trust's goals are to make the Academy South landscaping more available to the community, preserve its history, and pass this newest iteration on to the future. The Heritage Overlay Code values both views of the building and retaining substantial trees. And the duality is challenging, but the Trust has come to the difficult conclusion that preserving the Sacred Heart Garden and improving public views of the very historic Providence Academy is more important in this case than saving the trees. The original Sacred Heart design element has evolved over the decades following its design around 1875 by Mother Joseph herself. Its significance is still emerging through ongoing research, but it is extremely likely that it is the oldest Euro-American formally designed landscape in the Pacific Northwest that still exists today. It may be the oldest Euro-American designed formal cultural landscape in continuing use in the Western United States. Now, whatever the eventual geographic range of significance, there is no doubt that the Sacred Heart is a singularly important piece of Northwestern cultural landscape, and it must be preserved. There's additional significance that accrues because it was designed by a woman at that time. And by comparison, the first recognized American woman landscape architect is Beatrix Farrand, who opened her practice in 1895 in New York City. The first landscape design firm in the Northwest operated by women dates to 1929, Lord and Shriver in Salem. As we continue to explore and learn more about the history of the Sacred Heart design, we have submitted a grant to the National Trust for Historic Preservation for archaeological investigation to locate remains of the original pathways and plantings. And we look forward to hopefully receiving that grant and being able to continue to explore this and discover even more about the significance of this landscape. We are incredibly concerned about the potential for damage to the Sacred Heart. The root systems of the large trees, which you can see on the slide here, the blue sprawl right in the middle of the slide, We're concerned that those roots will continue to damage the Sacred Heart and stand in the way of preservation of this important landscape. The roots are already spreading within the remaining heart perimeter and will have damaged any remaining below-ground resources. Further, if and when one of those trees were to fall, the extensive root system that you see there could pull up a large amount of the heart element, and not to mention the potential damage from falling trees, which we have precedent of after the 1962 Columbus Day storm, when other trees fell into the building and did significant damage. Every tree, we believe, is important, but to our knowledge, although those cedar trees are old, there is no known specific history associated with them. For example, students in the 1950s had a tradition of planting trees for Arbor Day, and there are historic photos of the ceremonies, and none of those identified trees remain. There are also no designated Vancouver heritage trees on this site. Most of the existing trees date from after 1962, when that famous Columbus Day storm took down many in the region. The Academy's roof had to be replaced, and portions of the South Gallery porches had to be replaced because of that damage. Any significance relating to the Sisters of Providence concludes with their 1966 closure of the building. With regard to views, per public input, including the Preservation Commission, the new plaza at Sea and Evergreen on the Aegis property was deepened north to south in order to aid the public's ability to see the Academy. And that improved view is now dominated by those two large cedars, and a large central portion of the building remains obscured. The former 1976 restaurant building, which previously stood in front of the building, was removed to improve the view, but the trees remain in the way. As I said, it's a difficult conclusion that we've come to, but we are committed to mitigation for the removal of the trees. The new landscape design does include trees. There will be trees in the green space behind the Providence Academy, between it and the Aegis development. And there are trees planned for the parking lot as well. We are planning to make a sizable contribution to the city's tree fund with the intent to plant more trees than are being removed. And frankly, we'd also love any suggestions as to where you would like to see more trees in the city limits so that we can help improve and grow the canopy throughout the city. We would also like to work with an organization to reuse the wood from the trees that we feel must come down. And we would welcome any suggestions that you might have of who might be interested in working with this wood. As I said, we appreciate the opportunity. We look forward to a conversation. I'd like to turn it over now to Stephen Elbeck from Sarah Architects.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Elbeck with Sarah Architects. Appreciate your time this evening. I would like to take a few minutes of your time to just walk through the information packet that you received earlier. I'll try to be brief, as I'm sure you've had ample time to study up on it. Is that a document that can be put up on the screen? The Commissioner's information packet?
Attachment 3.
Thank you. Do I have to ask to advance, or do I have technology on the pad here to do that? Okay. Next slide, please. So a brief overview of the project with some of the zoning information for your reference, and a short narrative, which I think you have heard from Temple, so we'll move to the next slide. Keith has provided some background content on the Heritage Overlay District. Diagram here is intended to help give graphic representation to that. The overlay district is several decades old. You can see at the time of its authorship, the El Presidente building was still there, and one can imagine that the Heritage Overlay might look different with El Presidente removed. It's also, I think, notable that in the 1978 National Register nomination for the landscape pieces, the Sacred Heart Path is called out with special significance. And that's one of the singular pieces that is called out as it relates to the site. Go to the next slide, please. Reference information, the existing conditions. You can see the Sacred Heart is there, the trees that we've started our discussion about. The El Presidente building has been removed and is now being used as a surface parking lot. And as you're well aware, construction of the Aegis Phase 1 is underway to the west of the property. Next slide, please. Recent photographs for reference. Here you see a view from the southwest looking to the northeast. This is roughly at the corner. You can see the Aegis building step back to try to enhance the visibility of the Academy building. The cedars that we're all talking about prominently feature at the center of the photograph. Next slide, please. Here we are directly south of the main entrance with the trees. The two cedars that have been in discussion are the two on the left from this vantage point at the bottom of the Sacred Heart. Very little bit of the Academy facade is visible. Next slide, please. Moving to the southeast at the apron of the driveway, you can see the conditions there. Next slide. Detail shots of some of the other features around the site. The top left, the view looking to the south with the library in the background, the former El Presidente site, now parking lot in the foreground. Image B, the brick paving at the southeast corner of the Academy building being disturbed and creating an unsafe path. Image C on Evergreen looking east, some of the historic fabric there. And image D, some additional details, the heart, lovely little stone caps that occur at the paving transitions. Next slide, please. The tree inventory image, this is Arborist report from January 2023. We've already had some discussion about that, but we are interested in removing all of the trees in the garden area and replacing them with new material. We also are aware that there is a tension between the overlay code and the tree code at those two cedars particularly. Next slide, please. So these are some of the design influences that have been developed by the Historic Trust. And so preserving the Sacred Heart as the most important feature of the original landscape is one of our goals. Improving the visibility of the Academy, particularly the main entrance. We know that this is something that City and the Commission have also expressed an interest in. Creating places for community gathering and individual reflection, so having a publicly available space for many types of needs. Educating with the interpretive experiences that begin on the site and continue into the building. And to connect downtown Vancouver's major open spaces. So if we could move to the next slide, please. As it relates to the open spaces, one of the things that's been exciting for us as we've been working with the Trust is to think about how this particular new garden, or reinvigorated garden, could be a part of Vancouver's version of sort of an emerald necklace that connects the reserve to the waterfront. Next slide, please. As it relates to the specific property, as designers, and joining online today is Dan Jenkins, who's a landscape architect with me at Sarah. As designers, we looked at the building and its formality and the heart and its significance, and tried to find some organizing principles that we could use in crafting the design of the garden. So on the right-hand side, directly south of the main entrance, is the Sacred Heart. You see the orange dot at the intersection of those two lines. The Providence Hall on the left is the other north-south axis that we think is quite prominent. And there's an opportunity, we think, to connect this historic garden and landscape with a newer landscape. And there's also an interest by the Trust to explore constructing an homage to the Blessed Mother, which is a site feature that has been lost to time. We can move to the next slide. One of those design influences was to try to consider different types of garden spaces that people could use. And so in constructing and starting to think about the layout of the west new garden spaces, we have proposed constructing gardens that have different scale to support different types of gathering, different textures and plant material. So at the top there, just south of Providence Hall, we're proposing a large open plaza. The next in this series is the elliptical garden there, which would be a different type of strolling garden, and then a new gathering space at the south at a smaller scale. We're sensitive to the fact that the heart is the primary feature of the site, so we're also proposing some ways to buffer the new from the existing Sacred Heart. Next slide, please. High-level overview of some of the features that would need to be removed from the site, some abandoned transformer and electrical gear, and a few other features. Next slide, please. But as we lay the guiding principles and design influences onto the site, you see here, again, Sacred Heart being the most prominent feature on the site, and then constructing the west series of gardens with the plaza, the central garden, south garden. Indicated by number 5 is an opportunity to have some interpretation for the site. And number 6 is an idea about where an homage to the Blessed Mother might be constructed. And then item 7 there is that the Trust is interested in trying to complete the heritage sidewalk along Evergreen. So next slide, please. Examples of some different paving materials, brick, concrete, some concrete detailing. We can go on to the next slide. Some garden character studies, and the North Garden, more of an elevated plaza with areas for gathering and sitting. Central Garden, you can see a little looser type of planting, and then the South Garden having some places for getting off of the path and getting to a moment of quieter reflection. See the next slide, please. A number of trees and different types of plantings here. The shrub scale, we are indicating in this plan the 2 cedars, though we may not have them quite big enough there. Next slide, please.
I know it's not question time, but real quick, you just said those 2 trees are the cedars, are existing cedars?
If you can go back, please. The 2 green circles near those 2 that just got circled. Yep.
I wasn't sure if it was new.
Those are not new.
Thank you.
Here, a number of digital representations of the design concepts. So here's an illustrative plan. Again, the Sacred Heart directly south of the main entrance, the 3 gardens directly south of Providence Hall. You can see the cedars again there. Next slide, please. 3-dimensional axonometric representation. You can see the spaces. I'll pick up the pace here. We can keep going. Next slide, please. Another aerial representation of the site, and you can see how the heart, the new gardens, and the Academy building relate to each other. Next slide. Here's a view from the South Garden looking up towards Providence Hall, and you can see that sort of enfilade of garden rooms, those 3 gardens in series there, as they rise up towards the building and as the grade changes, raises up towards the building. Next slide, please. On the North Garden, the plaza area directly outside of Providence Hall, a view looking back to the south towards the library, and again seeing the other 2 gardens in the intermediate space. Next slide, please. Here we are near the center of the heart, looking due west towards Aegis Phase 1. You can see that little connector path with a planting buffer. Significantly present on the right-hand side of the image is the existing cedar trees. Next slide. near the Evergreen and the South Garden. View towards the Academy, you can see the cedars significantly impact the view corridor towards the entry and the cupola. Next slide, please. Walking along the path just outside the South Garden, again, garden room in the foreground, path towards the heart, and the cedars obstructing the view. Next slide, please. This is over on the east side during the near the southeast parking lot. Removing some of those holly trees opens up that view corridor to the front door and to the cupola, which we think achieves one of the goals of the overlay district. The cedars there just to the left of center are the existing cedars. Next slide, please. This is near the foot of the main entrance to the Academy building. This is one of the cedars, or you can see the two cedars here, as you begin to walk along the path to the south. Next slide, please. Another image looking to the west. Next slide, please. Due south, looking towards the main entrance, the removal of the hollies and the trees to the east side of the central path of the hearth, open up the view there. You can see that the cedar trees impact some visual access to the Academy building. Next slide. So here we are in between the Sacred Heart heading towards the new garden, and you can see the elliptical garden, middle garden in the foreground there. Next slide. And then a view from the southwest corner of the Academy, looking diagonally to the southeast. Next slide. Looking more east from the corner of the building, you can see the cedars there. Next. And then experience of being inside of that south garden, looking to the north. Next slide. Another image of what it might be like to be in one of those smaller, quieter garden spaces. Next slide. So as Temple mentioned, we are interested in a tree mitigation approach. Come to this decision after much contemplation. So these images are similar images as we just went through, showing the potential if those cedar trees are removed and a mitigation strategy is pursued. So we can go through these relatively quickly as they are similar images. You can see the cedars opening up the views to the front of the building. Next slide, please. Go ahead, thank you. Next slide. Here we start to see that with the cedars gone, the connection is more readily visible. Cupola and the main entry much more apparent from the southwest corner. Similar view. Here we are from the southeast near the curb cut for the parking lot, showing those cedars removed, and one of the opportunities to get a commanding view of the entire Academy building. The experience of the heart, which is currently overwhelmed by the trees on the northwest portion of the heart. When you walk under that very, very dense branching, it changes the aspect and appreciation for the heart. Removing those, you can see it opens that up.
Those green trees on that slide are proposed new trees, right?
These are all new trees.
So those will be 20 years before they get that size?
Pardon me, commissioners, could you please identify yourselves when you're speaking?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Jan Bader.
So those trees, we typically show trees at about 2/3 maturity. So it would be several years before they are fully that height. The goal, though, is to not buy little tiny 2-inch caliper trees at the beginning, to get trees that are farther into their growth cycle. Again, a view from the heart looking to the west. View looking up towards the front door of the academy. You can see opportunity to really appreciate the historic work there. Next slide. Next slide. I think these next two are both similar images of the smaller garden spaces. Next slide. I think that's the end of the graphic package. We're happy to take any questions, welcome feedback. Thank you for your time.
Any questions on the part of commission for the applicant?
Yes. Thank you so much for that presentation and for all the materials you provided us. It was really helpful.
You need to identify yourself.
I am Julie Bond, Commissioner. Thank you, I'm sorry. So one thing I was excited to see in the application was that, and you didn't really, at least I didn't hear you mention it, but maybe you did, I apologize if you did. You're going to be using some of the salvaged brick from the laundry, which is great. I was curious if you know where you're going to use it, or if it's just plans to be determined.
We have some thoughts about them. We haven't fully resolved the detail. That brick is, it's probably not suitable as a traffic brick. We think it's going to be too soft and fragile for that type of use. Where we can, there are some moments, as you might look in greater detail at some of the imagery for some details at transitions and thresholds where there are smaller accent areas where we can bring in some of those hidden bricks and those legacy bricks. At different times, we've also looked at other features around the site that might be constructed using or integrating some of those bricks.
That's great, thank you. And then you also mentioned in the proposal that you'll have up front at least two interpretive panels, one talking about Mother Joseph and another about the Sacred Heart. Will you incorporate within those interpretive panels or ones in the future about things like that? Because that's a very interesting feature. You know, we incorporated the hidden brick, which is very specific to our region, that kind of thing. Will that be included in those or in future ones?
So the trust is working on what the interpretive package will be and how it gets phased into the site. We're trying to provide a framework to support telling many of the fantastic stories and the stories we continue to learn about the Academy.
Great. Okay, thank you. Pardon me, I do tend to have a lot of questions. So one thing, let's see. Okay. I think that I had a question that I don't necessarily need to ask. It was more specifically about the plants, but I think you both addressed it, both Temple and you have addressed that you're hoping to get these historic documents that indicate what kind of historic planting, and then your imagery was really helpful. So I'll move on to the next one. So one thing I felt like it was a little bit lean on the green, particularly the plaza seemed really big, and I was just curious why you chose it to be so large and didn't add more of the garden flavor or the parkland-like features that the Academy property has been kind of known for.
Sure. So we do try to, excuse me, we do try to provide a variety of different types of garden spaces. The South Garden is probably the loosest and most intimate. The Middle Garden, a different type of structured type of experience with planting and strolling opportunity. What we call the North Garden, the plaza closest to the Providence Hall and the Academy building itself. That programmatically is envisioned as an opportunity to extend Providence Hall into the landscape. There's a door connection from Providence Hall directly to the exterior, and that plaza has been sized so that it can support companion events that might be occurring in Providence Hall outdoors.
Like a spillover?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I think that those are the only questions that I have. I think you've answered them. Sorry, it's taking me a second just to reread them. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any further? Does any member of the public have a question or comment for the applicant?
We have one person online, so Mark Thompson, if you're interested in making a comment, could you let us know?
No, I have no comment. The presentation was very nice.
Thank you.
Anything further? The commission will now deliberate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Well, deliberation time.
I've been doing most of the talking, so you guys get to begin, and I'll chip in.
Thank you for asking a lot of your questions. It makes it so that we don't have to ask so many. I really like that they are preserving the Sacred Heart feature in front of the Academy. I think that landscaping of the front is definitely needed. I'm hesitant, and I'm leaning towards the staff recommendations of leaving the street trees and the cedars. I understand about the fluidity and the connectiveness and the view shed. Believe me, I know about view sheds, but I also know about people, and I also know about shade, and I also know what the shade that those trees provide. And this looks like a very stark and open place where I would love to go and have a spillover event, but I don't know if I'd want to hang out in an area that doesn't have any shade for any period of time. And I think that looking at the proposed, I'm looking at the illustrative plan, but you know, a lot of the plans without the street trees, they have like these little brick connector things, which are unique in themselves. But these are pin oaks, and so they have a really shallow root base, and they can be replanted and they can be reused. So I wouldn't even know why we wouldn't just be using the same trees if you wanted to improve the sidewalk. We don't have to get rid of these trees. They're alive, and they're used to being transplanted. That's what pin oaks are. That's why they use them in urban planning so much. So if people are really enthused about the sidewalk plan, my recommendation would be to not kill the trees, but to just reuse the pin oaks that are there already, which match the other pin oaks on the street, rather than going for a completely different look on this corner of a new building surrounding a beautiful old building with a beautiful new landscaping. That's my recommendation for the street trees.
So, this is Bader.
Oh, and that was Morgan Fraser.
Keith or Charles, so will they be required, if they took out those street trees, would they be required to replace them with other street trees?
Charles Ray, urban forester with City of Vancouver. Yeah, if the city approved the removal of street trees, new street trees would be required, as long as there's space for the street trees, meaning appropriate spacing. But if in this location, we would code requires replacements.
So there's still going to be street trees there. The question is whether it's going to be these trees, or they're going to have to take out essentially mature trees and plant new trees.
Correct.
And I've just seen that happen so much in Vancouver, and we're about to do Main Street, and I'm just watching all the street trees just go left and right, being replanted, of course, with little trees. And so I'm, you know, I walk down this corridor all the time, you know, and I really enjoy the trees along the streets. It's one of the things I really like about walking through Vancouver. One of the things I dread about the Main Street redo, because I feel like we might lose some more trees. So I tend to agree with staff on their recommendation about keeping the trees. I do like the plan. I like the plaza. I like the openness of the Sacred Heart. You know, no one's going to drive on it anymore. You know, it's just going to be for pedestrians. It's interesting, the connectivity that the plan has created with the parking lots, you know, because that's not really original to the design. But I don't think it really takes away from the Sacred Heart itself. I think it kind of adds to the beauty of it in the middle.
Yeah, this is Bader. So I'm really torn on this because I do agree that the Sacred Heart itself looks better without the cedars, but so much of the history of that site's been lost already with the smokestack and the buildings. It's just a shame to, even though I understand that these trees are probably not planted in 1902, but they have been there, you know, even if it's been since the 60s, it's still
Our lifetime.
a long period of time. So I'm really torn because I do agree with the landscape architect and that it does look better, sort of more cohesive without that, at least the great big one that's in the Sacred Heart. But at the same time, I just hate to lose more history off that site. And I do appreciate the, you know, that you've done a plaza, so there's some outside space to go along with Providence Hall, so you can essentially have, you know, events that are indoors and outdoors, or maybe just outdoors. So I like the idea of more public space there and the gardens that are being proposed. But to Morgan's point about shade, those trees, new trees, will take a long time to mature to the point where they're actually providing much in the way of shade in those gardens. And it's a south-facing front.
Right.
So, oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Julie.
You saw his thought bubble.
I thought he was going to close it, and that's what I was worried about. So I really have to jump in.
Well, it's our task now to accept a motion regarding the recommendation of the city.
Julie,
I'm not done. I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to make comments too.
No, I didn't.
Okay. This is Julie, Commissioner. So I think there's some really great things about this plan. We've talked about them already. I'll just say I really do like the 3 gardens. I'm the kind of person who would come into this space and take my book and sit and read in that little nook that is in that rendering. I think that this is very inviting. So I think there are a lot of really excellent qualities in this plan. But I do feel strongly about and do support the staff's recommendation not to cut those trees on the street. I'm not on the fence about that. Those trees are gorgeous. They're large. There's a couple that are just those little pin trees. There's like 2 new plantings, I think, but the rest are actually quite mature. They do offer a lot of shade, not just for people going to the academy, but people walking on the sidewalk. I think it's really critical to keep that in place. And I just think it's important to leave those older, more mature shade trees than putting in these trees that have so much longer to go before they reach that stage and someone cuts them down again. So I just really feel strongly about that. And for the 2 cedars, I also agree with staff that they should be retained. I do dispute the interpretation of standing on the C Street and Evergreen and not having a very good view. I think really it's the massing of the new structure that inhibits the view more than those 2 cedar trees. I think that's really the issue of a good view shed. And the cedar trees, while they're not, I agree with Jan, they're a little bit scraggly, but they're still part of the property, part of what makes the academy. And I do think that it's okay to look through trees to a building. I think that's okay. I don't dispute that. I don't see why that would be a problem. If it was and the code does specifically state it's new construction that shouldn't obstruct the view. It doesn't say natural foliage or trees. It's specifically referencing buildings, specifically referencing new construction. So I don't really think that interpretation is quite accurate based on our code. And while I do think it's great and wonderful, and I think it's very important, the plan to revitalize the Sacred Heart, I think it's critical for this plan. I think it's fabulous that this is kind of that central focal point, and there's been a lot of thought and consideration on how to go about that. I'm just not convinced that those trees are a threat to the Sacred Heart. So again, I just would go with the staff's recommendation to keep those. But I would go a step further. I think tree number 2, this English oak, should be kept as well. It's close to the sidewalk. It, again, provides shade. It's a beautiful tree. It's known for its decorative aesthetic. That's why people plant them. They have such a beautiful canopy. I don't see any reason to remove that tree. Again, people my height, 5'4", is not really going to have a problem looking through those trees or past that canopy as it grows vertical, and it is a tall tree already. I think that tree should be kept as well. So I think actually 3 trees out of the 18 should be saved. Plus the street trees. Thank you. Yes, the street trees. Don't forget those. Yeah, I feel like there was a strong argument about all the damage that those trees could do, and I just wasn't. I think that those are fears; those aren't realities. And trees do have roots, and we do, go about our lives, and until they become a problem, they can be, they don't need to be addressed preemptively. And we didn't see any evidence of them ruining the Sacred Heart. We don't have any images or just a supposition that it could, or that there's a potential. So anyway, I will just wrap up with saying I support the staff's recommendation to keep the street trees, the 2-seaters, but I also propose that we keep tree number 2, the English oak, or recommend, of course. Advise.
So is this a motion then to approve staff recommendation with the addition of the English oak and street trees?
Well, if they, yeah.
So, the Bader, Charles, that tree looks like it's in good shape. According to this, it's blue, so fair condition. The one that Julie's suggesting, the English oak, that is sort of right on the edge of the sidewalk. So would there be so it's in good condition, and yet and at this point, you're supporting taking that out?
I'm not necessarily, Charles Ray, Urban Forester with City of Vancouver. I'm not necessarily supporting removing that tree, and then there's also 2 additional trees that aren't on this plan right here, directly northeast of that oak. There's 2 more oaks that aren't shown on this plan, which are really nice trees. So there's actually 3 in that area as a compromise because of the view. And it looked like from the code that view was going from southeast to northwest. Mm-hmm. We weren't, and those trees look like they were most likely planted probably in the last either 90s or 2000s. We weren't necessarily looking at those. They're nice quality trees, so retaining them. My personal opinion is it's a historic site. Historic sites should have trees and should have large trees. Just the reserve is a good example of that. But because of that drawing that had that arrow through there,
to maintain the view corridor.
To maintain the view corridor, we didn't. We were trying to compromise, I would say.
Right.
But there's 3 trees in that area that are quality trees.
Right. And I guess that's where my dispute came in, because the code doesn't talk about trees obstructing.
Pardon me, commissioners?
This is Commissioner Bond.
Yeah, this is Chris Cook, legal counsel. A motion has been made. I have not. No?
No.
There was no motion. All right.
No.
Not yet.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for keeping us on the straight and narrow,
keep us on the straight and narrow.
I
I
just
tried.
feel like that view corridor doesn't apply when we're talking about these trees. That's the way I interpret the code, because the code is talking about new construction. It specifically says new construction should not impede the corridor. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness, but I think that it doesn't have as much weight as if it were to say any kind of obstruction. It's just saying new construction, a building, something to that effect. I think trees actually enhance, like you said. I think old trees on a historic property are part of that historic flavor. I think without the trees, this looks like a naked site, and it will continue to look naked for a long time. And I think that those kinds of sites feel a little bit soulless, and it takes some time to build that soul back up.
Thank you.
So is there a motion to approve the City of Vancouver's recommendation?
I would like to add that other tree, but I don't know what the other commissioners, if you agree with that, recommendation. Again, it's just advisory, but I'm hoping.
Yeah. How, this is Commissioner Frazier. I also really like the oak trees on that side, you know, and I really was thinking about the view shed because I read the staff report and not really looking at it in the sense of what the code actually, because, you know, I gotta pull up the code and pull up all these things and no. But it says right here, I would just read this more specifically, it just says construction. It doesn't even say new construction, it just says any construction.
This is Commissioner Bader. Can I clarify, Keith, that new construction, is that from the city code or is that from the overlay district?
The new construction is from the overlay district, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's not the general city code, it's the overlay district.
Correct, it was
Okay.
in the heritage overlay, yes.
Okay.
So would you agree with that we can also put that in our advice, is to keep that number 2 tree?
We can make that recommendation,
Okay.
I believe.
You could
Advise that.
make the motion to approve the staff recommendation and attach a proviso to include the English oak and street trees.
No, the recommendation is already, this is Commissioner Bader, the recommendation from staff is that all the street trees and 2 western cedars be retained.
Okay,
So what Julie's proposing is that recommendation plus retaining the 1 additional English oak in
okay.
the southeast corner of the site.
And so we're saying to approve the staff recommendation with the proviso to add the English oak.
Correct.
Yes.
Is that your motion?
Do you want me to make that motion?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'd like to move that we accept the staff's recommendation that the project move forward with their amendments to keep the 2 cedars, the street trees, and make an additional amendment to that recommendation to retain tree number 2, the English oak.
I will second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the staff recommendation with a proviso to include the English oak.
I'm not sure we're approving the staff recommendation because we don't have approval. We're supporting the staff's recommendation.
Okay,
You don't
Sorry
have to
for the-
rewrite it, Andy. We got it.
so we have a motion accepting the recommendation to the City of Vancouver.
You guys get the gist of
Supporting,
this, right?
yeah.
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay.
Susan, would you please take a roll call vote?
Jan Bader,
Aye.
Julie Bond,
Aye.
Morgan Frazier,
Aye.
Andy Gregg.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation.
The recommendation was unanimously approved. Moving on to new business. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Ray.
Thank you.
Moving on to new business, I'll make these brief. We have a couple of items. And thank you, members of the Historic Trust, for your presence.
Thank you. And Holly, it was really nice to see you in person. I've been listening to you over this thing for a year plus, and now it's nice to see you in person.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll make these brief on new business. The Revitalize Washington Conference is going to be held in Vancouver in early October. And we received a call for session proposals. And this was during the month of February, and the deadline for proposal is March 24th.
At least it's not the second.
And well, and so With the consent of staff and with the approbation of Dan Wyatt, owner of the Kiggins Theater, I've submitted a session about the Kiggins Theater's place in the redevelopment of downtown. And I will no longer be serving the commission at that time, but I wanted to submit that proposal, and I don't know yet if it's been accepted or not. But I would certainly welcome the companionship of fellow commissioners as we hammer together a presentation about the Kiggins Theater, its journey to the National Register of Historic Places, and its place in downtown Vancouver, and how it's the revitalization of the Kiggins is reflective of revitalization of downtowns in many places across Washington State. And so I will keep colleagues apprised of whether this proposal has been approved or declined, and would be more than happy to include folks on the commission in this, and encourage fellow commissioners, if they have an idea for a proposal, that they take advantage of this opportunity, especially since it is here in Vancouver. Then during the month of February, I had occasion to take part in the Army Corps of Engineers Portland District Navigation presentation by Catherine Pollock, and it was wonderful, and it was extensive, and I would have to say that it was amazingly educational, and I had no idea that the deepening of the channel and concerns of navigation of the Columbia River were so extensive, or that they dated back to 1866, and some of the current laws under which we operate today are 140 years old. And so my question of Catherine was, hey, has any PhD student ever thought about telling the story of the commercial and military navigation of the Columbia River as a really wonderful dissertation? And she said, in spite of the fact that there's extensive documentation readily available, nobody ever has. And so it was pretty much, and Michael Hauser from DAP was on the call, and I anticipated that it would be the sort of thing where it would be a meet and greet and a brief meeting, but it went on for 2 hours, and I was fascinated for the whole time. And so I will be joining the redux of this meeting in March, and we'll bring a further report about the archaeological concerns, the jurisdictional concerns, the historic preservation concerns, and how every government entity up and down the Columbia River has their finger in that water, toe in the water, with our parties to this activity that's being carried on and has been carried on since just after the war between the states. Go ahead, Julie.
How did you hear about this presentation? How did that come about?
Well, as it happened, I think it was maybe even last year, staff received an invitation from the Army Corps of Engineers to take part. And I took part because
You're interested.
I was interested, and I think Morgan took part because she's an archaeologist.
So you were in this too? I didn't attend the same meeting. I gave feedback on the programmatic agreement and leading up to, because we're doing all of the pre-work. So this happens every so many years. They have to dredge the Columbia, so the same project pretty much happens over and over and over again, and it is really fascinating.
But when it came time for introductions, I said that I was representing Clark County Historic Preservation Commission, and that our archaeologist member, Morgan Fraser, was also a party to this project. And so those were the two items that I concerned myself with since I last saw you all, and it was a pretty good deal. And I think that, and not every, I think we were the only Historic Preservation Commission involved, and that most of the other folks were municipal, county, state-level offices, as well as tribal representatives. Right. So it's a big deal.
Interesting.
Moving on to old business. We wanted to have an update on subcommittees, and I wanted to thank fellow commissioners for providing the outstanding summaries of the Historic Preservation Subcommittee narratives. And what I would like to do at this time is have the probable chairs of these subcommittees speak to their items. And so the outreach subcommittee was first, and this was my descriptor, and indicated that outgoing HPC chairs have always appealed to colleagues to continue outreach, which we were going to do in earnest until COVID-19 placed severe restrictions on our ability to be involved publicly and to raise our profile in the community. And so, as the outgoing chair, I want to echo that call and to remind colleagues that outreach subcommittee is the means by which we do reach a wider audience than applicants and folks who have property to put on the historic register, that we can reach not only traditionally represented communities, service organizations, clubs, but underrepresented communities too. And I keep thinking of our former colleague, Feli Garcia, and how we really wanted to have the underrepresented communities receive attention on the part of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Susan, I think we asked the commission members to let you know which subcommittee they wanted to serve on. Did you get that information from people?
I don't think we did. I didn't personally tell anybody. I thought we were here to discuss, and then we would volunteer.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and so it would be my goal that now that we see formal documentation about what the subcommittees entail, the time commitment involved, that we would ask our absent members, Thatcher and Mandler Huff, if they would, and I had mentioned to them in messages, please let staff know. So the design review and standards subcommittee. Is that you, Julie?
It is.
Okay, would you please?
Brief?
I'll be brief. Per request, I'll be brief. So yeah, this is the design review and standards subcommittee, and this is sort of where this discussion began, was that we really need some better design guidelines for our property owners. And I think the initial idea was to create a design guidance document, but after discussing our kind of authority to do so with our, I think she's the DAP mission, Michelle Thompson. She suggested that instead of that track, since we don't really have a strong enough code to kind of support that design guidelines, that we do what we can do, and that is to make our applicants or our property owners more aware of the resources that are available to them, specifically the National Park Service briefs. And so this proposal is basically, I'd like to have the subcommittee get together, and with a staff person, I think we would have to have a staff person work with us, to assess our current resources online that we have and add to them. We may need to do some restructuring. We would need to do some, I would think it would be helpful for us to take a look at other commission sites that don't necessarily, that have really good structures and other guidance and resources that aren't design-specific guidelines that have to do with code and how strong the code is. So basically making it more robust for our community. And then maybe in the future, when we get to the point where we can actually put some design guidelines, we'll at least have this previous background of having these resources. And then the last step to that would be, in the long term, once we have that set up on our site, that we have a kind of a meeting with all of the city people and the staff to walk through what the new structure looks like, how they can direct people to certain resources, and then also perhaps provide some insight on how to use the standards in their memos. Because sometimes they are, I think for the sake of being thorough, are using a lot of information that they may not need. And I'm hoping that this guidance that we have out there will kind of help direct their energies.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Frazier is
I'll be
directing
super
the-
brief. I'll be
is directing the demolition subcommittee.
Yes, I put together the background, and at present, what we're doing, we've met once, so far, only with city staff. I reached out to Susan because I didn't understand, because I couldn't find it on the web, about Clark County's demolition policy. And she said they do have one that mimics the city, so I think it's important that the county come on board. We generally, I've been meeting maybe once or twice a month. Well, we've only met once, so we met once for 1 hour. But I think that we would meet maybe once or twice a month virtually to kind of iron out. We are thinking that we will start, thinking back on former Commissioner Gall's presentation, we would start with the simplest, easiest, non-code writing strategy of having a checkbox on the demolition permit that says, is your structure over 50 years old? And if so, then you need to do X, Y, and Z, which is basically take some photographs, provide any information you have. And at present, city staff was looking for a repository for that information. And then how would that information be accessible, like for myself, if I was going to do some research? And so we were going to start on the easiest, simplest part of this giant program and see if we can get that through, and then think about, eventualities with, working with the city, with code or something of that nature.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday, Regional History Day is taking place, and it's a wonderful experience. Holly Chamberlain of the Historic Trust is our contact, and so if you're free on Saturday, it would be an opportunity to see young historians in action, and middle school and high school of all descriptions. And this was hopefully next year we'll be able to have underrepresented communities tell their story. What's your story? Through National History Day is the umbrella group, but it's Regional History Day. It's almost a day-long commitment, but if you have some time on Saturday, I'd invite you to take part. It's on the Washington State University Vancouver campus this year. And now Susan.
Okay, so we've been working on some additional details for the camp training plans. And for the last meeting,
I'm sorry, I thought we were going to find out who's going to join what committee so we can move forward. I just assumed we were doing that this meeting.
I think because it's the three heads and Jan.
And I already told
You'll
Julia to join hers.
Right, so.
I didn't know if that still stood.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Jan, and
Put her on the spot.
What staff person wants to join us? Anybody?
so I'm actually interested in the website work. So I think Bart and I generally talk about these things and, work it out as workload permits, but I am really interested in the website work, yeah.
Okay, great. Then I'll start an initial meeting, just for us to get organized, to figure out how often we want to meet and all that stuff. Okay.
Yeah, so this is Bart. So Morgan, you have Jason already working with you.
Yep.
Do you feel you need a county person as well right now, or you would come to us when you had things more fleshed out?
I think that it would be useful to have somebody with county knowledge in the beginning of this subcommittee, because according to the city, and I say this lovingly, they're the most important thing, and the county, well, I don't know what's going on over there.
I mean, the county does the work for the small cities too,
Right.
which has historic building stock that you don't want to lose track of.
Oh, yeah. We're losing one of our most beautiful historic homes in the center to massive development.
Maybe you should just, if you have meetings with Jason, send the invite to both of us, and then we can decide who has availability, because Susan has more background with current planning in the county than I do. and I've worked with building code, so I could get up to speed. And then I could be the point person for you, Andy, on the outreach
Oh, thank you.
for the time being. And, we can continue our presentation, work and things like that.
For instance, Leadership Clark County.
For instance, that, and I can assist you with your Kiggins pitch if you want, or anything else you're thinking of.
Thanks, Bart.
You know, it might be time to go back around to all the city councils, city and county councils like we did
Yeah.
5 years ago, to just, do a half-hour workshop about, hey, remember us? This is what we do.
Yeah, I mean, if we go speak to the Ridgefield Parks, that would be kind of a warm-up for that.
Yeah.
And that's what the PowerPoint from Leadership Clark County was, that last round of those presentations.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because I wanted to revisit that too, going to Ridgefield, being responsive to their request, because I think it's perfect for outreach group.
Yeah.
And that ties into that presentation that I was saying, which I haven't seen that one, but why preserve, and using some of those resources that I shared at that presentation to talk about the economy of it, the economic of our local region, and there's some other cool things. I would also maybe be on yours too, but I would need to have like a minor role.
Also, with the Ridgefield group, that would be an outstanding opportunity to try out. It's like taking it on the road before you go on the Great White Broadway.
Okay, I'll coordinate with you, Andy, on which month we want to do that.
Okay, thanks, Bart.
And I'll send out an email to Elaine and Heidi and see about what committees they're interested in as well.
I was in communication with Heidi and suggested that she pick a subcommittee or two. Thanks. Okay, back to camp.
Okay. Everybody loves camp. Just wanted to give you a few details and then ask you for some direction. I sent out the pricing sheet last time, and as you may recall, for an in-person 6-topic training, which is pretty much their best level of training, that's $9,000. And we are still applying for the grant from DAP for that cost. And I have emailed Michelle to ask her what other costs that might be able to cover. The camp information talked about possibly a 2 half-day training or a 1 full-day training. There are additional costs if you break it into 2 pieces, and those costs are for accommodations, per diem, and ground transportation. So that's something to consider if...
That's not included in the $9,000, that's just the training fee.
Right, yep, that is the single, so all of the transportation costs for a full-day training are included in the $9,000, but if you split it into 2, then they would,
There's an overnight.
yeah, exactly.
There's going to be an overnight anyway, because they're coming from DC.
That's built in.
But that's built in. I think they're assuming that that might be either the night before or the night after, but for sure, if you split it into 2, there would be,
Yeah, okay.
Also want a little direction on that. Also want a little direction on day of the week. And there's some additional costs potentially here too. So the camp trainers prefer Thursday, Friday, or Saturday as their days they would like to provide the training. If in this building we choose a Saturday, the security is already here on Thursday and Friday, so there's no additional cost. If we do a Saturday, there's an additional cost. They think it would likely require 2 guards because they'd have to give each other breaks, and with 30 people, that's the number that they would potentially recommend. And that could be between $700 and $800 for that service. And so I wanted to get some direction from you about the half day or full day, and Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. As for the rooms, the hearing room and the training room are generally available almost all Fridays. Thursdays, it just depends. Saturdays, they're definitely available. So, because generally this building is closed on Saturdays. And in looking into all of this, one comment was made that in talking about security and the guards, that it is a different atmosphere in this location on Saturdays. There could be additional security concerns.
In the neighborhood or in the building?
Yeah, around the building. There is more activity.
So, just a suggestion, is the city hall has the Aspen Room, which is the ground floor meeting room that has the ability to be segmented off from the rest of the building. So you can access the meeting room, the little snack area, and the restrooms, but you can't get into the elevators and you can't get into the rest of the building, so you don't need security. So, I mean, one thought is to check with Jason to see if that's a possibility of using that room, because I did that a lot when I had like after-hours meetings or weekend, because there's still outside doors from the patio, people come in that way, and you don't have to have the front desk staffed because it's got a sliding door that shuts it off. And you can't get into the elevator unless you have a card key. The only, and then this might have changed a couple years down the road, the only proviso is there had to be a city staff person at the training that was sort of like the sponsor of the activity, but, you know, I think Jason, and he already has staff that are interested in coming, so. The downside of that, of course, is unless you go over and get the crash course on the AV equipment, you know, you'd have to, you know, get somebody to prep you on that. But that's one possibility rather than paying for 2 security guards to sit here all day.
Their AV equipment is pretty straightforward. Susan and I have been over there. You know, a lot of these people that are coming from out of town tend to end up at the Hilton anyway. So that, I would think that's worth looking into. Yeah, let's talk to city staff when Jason's back.
Great idea.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely look into that.
Since I'm retired, I don't really have strong feelings about 2 half-day or 1 full day, or what day of the week it is, so.
I would propose 1 full day, because when I talked to them, it sounded like they also preferred 1 full day, even though they accommodate both. But I would like, because then you're on a roll, you're kind of building momentum. That would be my personal preference, but I'm flexible, I can do whatever. For me, I could deal with a Friday. I could take a day off, but Thursday would be a little tricky. So I would say Friday or Saturday, Saturday being my first preference, especially if we did it at the city hall. If we aren't able to and we have to pay for security, then Friday can become.
The downside of City Hall on Saturday is the farmer's market is right outside the front door, and all the parking is essentially taken.
Unless you're early. Yeah, so that would be my 2 cents. I don't know if it's worthwhile just polling us, like doing a poll on email, so then since we don't have everybody here.
What do you think, Morgan?
I'm available either Fridays or Saturdays. I can do a full session, I can do half sessions, I don't really.
So maybe
in
check
that
with
way.
Elaine and,
Right, yeah, I know that, you know, being, Heidi being a lawyer, you know, and Elaine traveling, you know.
Right.
that the Saturday actually might work, and if we bring new commissioners on.
well, and we're also going to make it available to staff and hopefully other preservation, you know, appropriate staff from the Historic Museum, Holly, anybody appropriate from the trust. So, I mean, but obviously we need to choose the date and the model that works best for us. And
Right.
Yeah, so I was trying to get an idea of the day, and then I was going to do either doodle poll or some sort of way of looking at different dates that would work for all of the members. But I can definitely, with the email I'm going to send anyways, I can ask, and I was planning to ask Elaine and Heidi as well. So I'm happy to include that in the email. One additional question is planning to look into catering. Camp somewhat suggests that as well, makes it so everybody doesn't have to go out and come back in. And so there's two potential options for that. I have asked Michelle at DAP if that is a cost that could be included. She's working on that to let me know. But that could be a cost that would be a match from the city funds that the commission has.
You know,
So-
if DAP's going to pay the fee for camp, I don't think it'd be unreasonable to ask participants to cough up $15 or $20 as a registration fee to cover the cost of the coffee and lunch. Unless, because I don't think we're
I'd be
planning on charging like a, $200 registration fee to come to the event.
No.
I think we were going to make that available to the community, but I don't think it would be unreasonable to say it's $20 to attend. And sometimes people are a little more committed if they have a little bit of skin in the game.
I will have to look into how we might do something like that, collect money. I've never done that with, well, working for government, there's a whole lot of rules, and so I'm not sure if we would be able to do that or not, but the folks in finance could help try to figure that out.
And we're far out, so once we kind of have a better plan, we can also figure out.
I'm sorry.
We're also a ways away from
Yes,
the event. So we'll have
absolutely.
time to figure that out.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so you're going to check with Elaine and Heidi on full day. I think we're all in agreement, full day.
It sounds,
Yeah.
I mean,
So
just might as well
Friday-
immerse yourself all
Friday
day,
or
have lunch,
Saturday.
you know?
And you're going to check with Jason about the building.
Yep. Okay. The only other thing that I wanted to mention is WebEx is, so moving to the next agenda item, if that's okay.
The rest is up to you, Susan.
WebEx is transferring to a new system, and so it's going to be called, the system we use right now is called Events. It's going to be called Webinar. And I will be honest with you, we've had some staff events, and they haven't gone really well. We have no choice. We have to go to this new platform. Events is going to be closed down. So the next event or the next session in April will be on webinar. I am going to schedule a practice session that anyone can attend just to try it out. And I would suggest, hopefully it won't take really long, but if you are able, try to log in and test it out, because even if you're not going to use it in April, you could in the future have to use WebEx if you need to stay home or whatever. And so, and if the time doesn't work for you, let me know and we can schedule a one-on-one practice. But the issue appears to be with the passwords, and there are generally two passwords. I don't know why, but can't have just one.
Nope.
So just want to let you know that in advance. We'll do what we can. We're going to schedule some trainings and practice internally, and then we'll also have a practice for you. But next time, if you're, or whenever you're going to be online next, I would give yourself a little bit of extra time to try and work it out. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Good of the order. I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance and participation tonight. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy.
Any others? At that case, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I'll give you a motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the meeting be adjourned. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. She's the lawyer.
Okay. Okay.
It said she was online, she just didn't say anything.
No, I thought she was the one who jumped.
No, that was
That was Christine Cook.
Talking to us, not Becky.
not Becky, right?
I mean, Christina.
The other lawyer.
Oh. Christine's the county attorney and Becky's the city attorney, because it's a joint commission, so.
We went from no legal advice?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. You know, as long, there will be times I think it'll be helpful to have.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Not in any kind of procedure.